When you were a kid, chances are that your folks told you all sorts of white lies to keep you from getting in trouble. It's amazing what insane things some parents can get their children to believe. But what's even more strange is how some of these myths can linger into adulthood and then get passed down to the next generation, and the next, and the next. If you've believed any of the following 15 myths your entire life, don't feel too bad. It's entirely likely that even mom and dad didn't know they aren't true. It seems like the act of cracking one's knuckles is totally satisfying for half of us, and absolutely nerve-shredding for the other half. Some of you watching this video are probably cracking them right now just because we mentioned it. And for those who do it often, even the long-standing warning that it causes arthritis probably isn't enough to make them stop. Well, as you've probably guessed, there's good news. There's absolutely no medical evidence linking knuckle cracking with arthritis. The popping is caused by a bursting of bubbles in the synovial fluid, which is what lubricates our joints. Several studies have shown that although chronic knuckle poppers may have reduced grip strength over the years, arthritis simply isn't a risk, which makes it seem likely that at some point years and years ago, some fed-up parents simply made this up in a last-ditch effort to get their kid to lose the habit. The chances are also very good that it didn't work. Most of us have heard all our lives that dogs are colorblind, or more specifically that they can only see in black and white. For starters, this demonstrates a lack of understanding of the condition of colorblindness in general, which only causes those with the condition to be unable to tell certain colors apart, most frequently red and green, and less frequently blue and yellow. But dogs aren't even colorblind by the proper definition of the term, they just perceive colors differently from humans. Reds, greens, and oranges appear on the yellow-blue spectrum to dogs, which encompasses much of their color field overall, along with violet. Looking through a dog's eyes would certainly be an unusual experience for any of us, but it certainly wouldn't look anything like an inability to process color. Dogs also see in much sharper detail than we do, and have far superior night vision. So if anything, it's our vision that's limited compared to theirs. Here's one that literally everyone has heard at some point, and most of us still wait for 30 to 60 minutes after eating before jumping in the pool. It's because we've all been told that failing to do so can strike us with massive cramps, causing us to be unable to swim and leading to a watery demise, all because we couldn't just wait a little while to dive in after putting away that huge burrito. Well, it's entirely untrue, but this myth has been around for so long it's unlikely to go anywhere. It can be traced all the way back to at least 1908, when the warning appeared in Scouting for Boys magazine, with the stern admonition, cramp doubles you up in extreme pain so that you cannot move your arms or legs, and down you go. You may drown, and it will be your own fault. The claim was debunked as long ago as 1961, when exercise physiologist Arthur Steinhaus shot it down in the Journal of Health, Physical Education, and Recreation. But even decades later, well-meaning parents everywhere throw wrenches into their kids' summertime fun by repeating this total falsehood. Here's another one that many of us still take as the gospel truth, especially those of us old enough to have had standard cathode ray TV sets in the family home as children. Sitting too close to it, we were told, could permanently damage your vision and might even cause you to go blind. But many years and scientific studies later, this is also proven to be dead wrong. In fact, there's a reason that so many kids develop the habit of sitting up close, because their eyes are better at focusing at that distance with no eye strain than adult eyes are. Of course, if your child has difficulty seeing the tube from further away, that could be a sign that a visit to the eye doctor is in order to check for nearsightedness. But when it comes to actually causing damage to the eyes, TV has been falsely accused. It's simply not true at any distance. On the flip side of this, many of us remember being told as kids that eating plenty of carrots will improve your eyesight, and their abundance of vitamin A is usually cited as the reason why. But not only is this false, it's a falsehood that was deliberately invented and propagated. During World War II, British Royal Air Force pilots were renowned for their success in spotting and shooting down Nazi aircraft at night. This is because of a top-secret new tool, airborne interception radar, which allowed them to spot incoming bombers from as far away as the English Channel. But in order to keep their secret under wraps, British intelligence mounted a disinformation campaign, convincing the public and the enemy that their pilots' superior night vision was due to their steady diet of carrots. Amazingly, this ruse was so successful that most people still believe it today. But the truth is, carrots have no more vitamin A than many other foods such as cheese, eggs, and liver, and even mega doses of the vitamin won't actually improve your vision. This one seems like common sense, because we've all seen with our own eyes the chaos that can ensue when kids get too hyped up on sugar. They'll bounce off the walls for hours before finally crashing from their sugar high. However, this appears to be a case where correlation definitely does not equal causation. For For example, many events at which lots of high-sugar foods are served, birthday parties, movies, holidays, and the like, are events where kids get excited, which would be true regardless of their sugar intake. It's also worth considering that parents who strongly believe there to be a link between sugar and hyperactivity, which is to say most of them, will see this link whether or not it exists, but science disagrees. Several studies over many years have failed to find any link between the two. Of course, this isn't meant to imply that unregulated sugar intake is A-OK, because excessive consumption of sweets can lead to all sorts of health problems in both kids and adults. It's just that hyperactivity isn't one of them. Does shaving really make hair grow back thicker? It certainly seems like it does, and we've probably all been told this at some point, whether we're trying to avoid those coarse hairs or we're hoping to fill in some bald spots. There's a reason why people think this, but it's not accurate. When you shave, the hairs are left with a blunt tip, which can give it the appearance of being stubby, darker, and thicker. But once it starts to grow in, it won't look any different than it did before. Your hair grows at a constant rate of growth and thickness, and no amount of shaving will change that. Everyone knows that overindulgence in alcohol is very bad for you, and not just because of the way you'll feel the next morning. Drinking too much can lead to a host of health problems, but most of us have heard, usually in college, that getting drunk literally kills brain cells, and they never return. It may absolutely feel like parts of your brain are dying after an extended session of boozing, but this is another warning that has no basis in science. In fact, given a moment's thought, it should seem obvious, because the amount of alcohol needed to cause actual cell death would lethally poison the person drinking it. Excessive drinking over long periods of time can cause damage to dendrites, which are the branch-like connections between brain cells, but moderate drinking causes no such damage, and even the occasional night of heavy drinking isn't going to destroy your brain, no matter what your blinding headache is telling you. Here's another alcohol-related myth that was actually helped along by children's cartoons. As kids, most of us remember the Warner Brothers shorts with the heroic Saint Bernard delivering a warming cask of brandy to a traveler who had gotten lost in the snow. Drinking can certainly make you feel warmer, but it's a temporary effect. Alcohol actually contributes to lowering your body temperature. This was demonstrated by the Mythbusters, who memorably proved this in the exact way you would expect, by getting drunk inside a giant freezer. Drinking causes blood cells to dilate, sending blood to the surface of the skin to produce the temporary warming effect. But this, of course, moves blood away from the center of the body, causing your core temperature to drop. Adam and Jamie indeed felt temporarily warmer, but monitoring their body temperatures revealed that the opposite was actually happening, and before too long the chill began to set in. Those guys always were willing to go above and beyond to bust a myth, and this one didn't stand a chance. When you were in school, you were probably shown this map of the human tongue. It illustrates the many regions of the tongue, each of which is responsible for detecting certain flavors, bitter in the back, sweet in the front, and so on. The only problem is this is complete nonsense, and just the fact that you can taste ice cream with more than just the tip of your tongue should be enough proof of that. The map was created by a Harvard researcher in the 1940s, and it's not even clear whether he meant for it to be taken literally. Researchers have been busily debunking it ever since, as study after study has shown that all areas of the mouth, not just the tongue, are sensitive to an array of taste sensations. For some reason, the falsehood has stubbornly stuck around for decades, even if your tongue has known it's untrue all along. When someone in the household has an episode of sleepwalking, our first instinct is always to wake them up, and then our second instinct is to refrain from doing just that, because we've been told all of our lives that waking a sleepwalker could have terrible, if somewhat vague, consequences. If we give it a moment's thought, it might seem a little odd that these consequences should be so poorly defined, and it's because the whole idea is rooted not in science but in superstition and folklore. Stanford University sleep specialist Dr. Mark Malawald has explained that in ancient times, it was thought that the soul leaves the body while we're sleeping. Waking a sleepwalker would therefore doom that person to an existence without a soul, wandering around as an empty shell of themselves. Dr. Malawald says that while there is no danger in waking a sleepwalker, people in this state can be extraordinarily difficult to rouse. So for that reason, the best thing to do is just to gently point them in the direction of their bed. When kids have to bundle up for the winter, a hat is always a necessary part of the ensemble, because everybody knows that most of your body heat is lost through the top of your head. At least that's what everybody thinks. But this is another myth that simply falls apart if you take a minute to think about it. It's true that body heat is lost through the scalp, but that's also true of any exposed part of your body. If most of your body heat exited through your head, which represents about 10% of your skin's surface area, it's safe to say that your head would be uncomfortably warm all of the time. It's always a good idea to cover up whenever the weather gets nasty, but making a special point of telling your kid to wear a hat in the winter is about as helpful as reminding them not to wear shorts. When we're kids, we learn pretty fast that the world is a weird and mysterious place that doesn't always operate like we expect it to. So even though it seems mind-boggling, it also probably sounded perfectly reasonable the first time a friend told you this classic bit of trivia, that a penny dropped from a tall building, it seems to be the Empire State Building in most tellings, will gather enough speed to act like a bullet, with the potential to kill anyone it strikes on the ground. This myth probably sticks around because kids generally don't have a high degree of familiarity with physics. It was also put to bed by the Mythbusters, who built a gun that could fire pennies at the same speed as the coin's terminal velocity, the point at which it can't go any faster and would be in free fall. Kids seem to think of falling objects as gathering speed indefinitely, but at a penny's top free fall speed of just over 60 miles an hour, the impact is barely enough to register a mild sting. It's tough to know where this myth originated from, but the Empire State Building's status as its usual main character is enough to suggest that it's probably been around since the early 20th century. When was the last time you swallowed a piece of chewing gum? If you're like most people, probably never, or at least not since you heard that gum takes 7 years for your body to digest, during which time it just sits there in your stomach. Swallowing the stuff just isn't pleasant enough for most kids to risk it, and this advice certainly seems to have had the desired effect. But in truth, there's no more harm in swallowing gum than in any other type of candy. While it's true that most gum bases don't break down in the body, that doesn't mean the substance stays there. It passes rather quickly, just like other foreign objects such as coins, which don't simply sit in the stomach if swallowed. In order to cause the kind of serious blockage that would result in gum staying in your system for any length of time, you'd have to eat vast amounts of it. And if you're doing that, problems are going to present themselves sooner rather than later. The notion that we only use 10% of our brain power has become absolutely embedded in the popular consciousness. We're willing to bet that more than a few of you watching this video have cited it as a fact, and the internet and pop culture have spread the idea far and wide. The hit Scarlett Johansson action film Lucy is predicated on it, as its main character is a super assassin who is able to access the other 90% of her brain power, which in reality would make her no different from the rest of us. The origins of this myth are entirely unclear, though some have attributed it to American psychologist William James, who argued in a book that we are making use of only a small part of our possible mental and physical resources. This could be interpreted in a lot of ways, but it's often cited as being among the only things ever said by any kind of authority on the subject, which could explain the myth's origin, for the simple fact that modern psychology finds the idea that we only use 10% of our brains laughable. Not that our brains are constantly firing on all cylinders. There are obvious times, such as when we're at rest or sleeping, when we're not using all of our gray matter. But when we need the full power of our awesomely complex brains, it'll be there, all 100% of it.